Mr. Botticelli, your hands are tied on Schedule 1, but it is ludicrous, absurd, crazy to have marijuana in the same level as heroin. Ask the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, if you could. Nobody dies from marijuana. People die from heroin. And every second that we spend in this country trying to enforce marijuana laws is a second that we're not enforcing heroin laws. And heroin and meth are the two drugs that are ravaging our country. And every death, including Mr. Hoffman's, is partly the responsibility of the federal government's drug priorities for not putting total emphasis on the drugs that kill, that cause people to be addicted and have to steal to support their habit. And heroin and meth is where all of your priorities should be. And it's not just Mr. Hoffman, a brilliant actor at 46 years of age, who first went to prescription drugs and then came back to heroin. That's our two major issues, I guess. I had a young friend, son of a girl I dated, who died of a heroin overdose about 2 years ago. I went to a party in Memphis recently, not Vermont, where the governor spent his entire State of the State hour address talking about the ravages of heroin in his state, but Memphis, Tennessee, where 4 women, give or take my age, well, maybe 15 years younger, sometimes I lose perspective, talked about heroin being a great problem among their children and in the Memphis community, and about another young man who had died of heroin. Heroin is getting into the arms of young people. And when we put marijuana on the same level as heroin and LSD and meth and crack and cocaine, we are telling young people not to listen to the adults about the ravages and the problems, and they don't listen because they know you're wrong. Because as Mr. Micah said, we know a lot of young people smoke marijuana. They shouldn't. Young people should be being young people. The most precious commodity in the world is time. Young people have got lots of time. Mr. Mike and I don't have that much more time. That's just the realities. And when you're young, enjoy being young, playing ball, taking it easy, just doing kids' things and learning. And you shouldn't be doing drugs, but they are. And we need to make sure that we keep them alive. We need to educate them. But our efforts ought to be toward meth and heroin. That's where efforts should be. And it shouldn't be Schedule 1. Anybody that goes to jail for marijuana is a crime when people for possession are taking their liberties away. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources. It's a crime committed by our government. There is a cultural lag in this country, and this Congress is a leader in it. With all due respect, you should be listening to scientists. I understand the parents who are grieved because their child died of an overdose. They didn't overdose on marijuana. And you're listening to them rather than the scientists? Mr. Botticelli, it may go back to A Few Good Men, the movie, Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth. The truth is the drug war failed. Your direction on marijuana is a failure. Get to dealing and saving kids from heroin overdoses. My young 22-year-old friend died of a heroin overdose. Yeah, he smoked marijuana, probably the first thing he did. But that's not why he smoked heroin or shot it up. Maybe he did it because he heard people like you saying they're all bad and they're all terrible and you can't deal with the truth, and tell them, well, maybe marijuana doesn't kill you. Heroin does and meth does. They're different. And until you deal with the truth, the kids aren't going to believe you at all. Now, you talked about alcohol, and you may have gotten to this. Cirrhosis of the liver, pretty serious thing. Violence against spouses and women. People don't smoke marijuana and beat up their wives and girlfriends. They get drunk. Sometimes they beat up their wives and girlfriends. And I know you've got your statistics. I would debate your statistics. And if you get into your statistics about the amount of people who had marijuana in their system who were arrested or had fatal accidents, I would submit they probably had other drugs in their system, like cocaine or crack in addition to the marijuana, or they had alcohol and marijuana wasn't the cause. Because what I've understand is people smoke marijuana, mostly they drive slower and they look out for the cops. They don't drive fast and wild like people do on alcohol and cause deaths. Maybe the reason there's so many more people smoking marijuana now is because they're not listening. And maybe they're doing the other drugs too. But it also shows that the drug war has been a failure. It's been a serious failure. Harry Anslinger started. You know who Harry Anslinger is, don't you?
I do not, unfortunately.
You never? Well, you should, because he's your great-grandfather. He started this war in the 30s, and he was tuned out too. And he did it to get the American public had problems, which sometimes I think we still got them, with Hispanics and Mexicans coming into this country. And it was a war on Hispanics and African Americans. And that's when they made marijuana illegal, was in the 30s. And it was all directed at those people. And Latinos are just as much discriminated against as African Americans in disparate arrests. It still continues to this day. It's 85 years since Anslinger started this. And it's the fact that we spend so much time arresting people is sinful. You talked about the overall effects of marijuana. Again, you can't name one person who's died from an overdose of marijuana, can you?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Right. And you say the cumulative effects. Do you know people, possibly, or heard of people who smoke marijuana who are corporate giants, run banks, run major corporations? Do you know about these people?
Yes, sir, but I also know equal number of people. I know a substantial number of people who also have gone on to develop significant disorders who have smoked marijuana. Again, 1 in 9 people who try marijuana develop a dependency, and we know that particularly those kids who use it earlier in their
Kids shouldn't use it. Kids shouldn't use it ever. And at age 18, people shouldn't be arrested for it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it should be 21. But kids shouldn't use it. That's something we all agree on. But the fact is, we need to put our priorities toward heroin and meth. What percentage of your budget goes towards heroin addiction?
So I don't think we necessarily slice our budget, our demand reduction budget, based on drugs. Again, our prevention efforts are focused on preventing drug use.
Isn't that a mistake when people die from heroin in great numbers that the Vermont governor spends his entire state of the state on heroin use? And we don't distinguish and try to save people's lives? That's when you knock people over at the corner store. It's not to get money to buy a donut because you're high. It's to buy heroin because you're hooked. Mm-hmm. That causes people to die. What percentage of your budget goes towards heroin addiction?
So I don't think we necessarily slice our budget, our demand reduction budget, based on drugs. Again, our prevention efforts are focused on preventing drug use.
Isn't that a mistake when people die from heroin in great numbers that the Vermont governor spends his entire state of the state on heroin use? And we don't distinguish and try to save people's lives? That's when you knock people over at the corner store. It's not to get money to buy a donut because you're high. It's to buy heroin because you're hooked. Mm-hmm. That causes people to die.
Our office in 2011, I think, acknowledged the burgeoning prescription drug and opiate epidemic that we have in the United States. In 2011, we released a plan that looks at dealing with the prescription drug abuse and opiate issues.
Let me ask you, my time's about to run out, and it may have. Let me ask you one thing. I corresponded back in 2011 with I guess your predecessor, Kirliowski?
Kurlikowski. He is actually the current director now.
Is he? He said back then that there was no particular, they haven't found any medical use. To date, however, the FDA and the Institute of Medicine have not found smoked marijuana to be a safe or effective medicine for any condition, nor has any medical association come out in favor of smoked marijuana for widespread medical use. I think that medical associations have, but are you not aware of the fact that people who use smoked marijuana to get them through cancer treatment, nausea?
I do, sir, and it's never been our office's position to either to arrest people who've been using medical marijuana. I think it's important for us, and again, unfortunately, that the FDA is not here. You know, that it's the FDA process that ultimately determines the scientific efficacy of a.
But couldn't you try to influence it? Shouldn't that be part of your job? I had a buddy who was a SEAL. He died of pancreatic cancer. So when he was he smoked marijuana at the end. His mother said it's the only thing that makes Oral smile or eat. So that was pretty good.
So our role in this is to rely on the FDA scientific process to determine. That's our influencing role, is to rely on the science. I would also say, and I find it unfortunate, and I think I would ask the chairman to invite Dr. Nora Volkow, who's the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, because that's where our policy and our science is derived from. We are a science-based office and a policy-based office. And I think if you listen to Dr. Volkow, who is not involved in a political discussion around substance use and marijuana, she will lay out for you the scientific evidence that.
Well, let me ask you this. You are prohibited by law from using any funds to study marijuana legalization for medicinal purposes or any other reason. You're the only office in the federal government that's restricted in that way, and you're required to oppose any scheduling of Schedule I substances, rescheduling like marijuana, that have been approved for medical purposes. Aren't you troubled by these constraints, and don't you think that your expertise should be allowed to be used and study science and contribute to a positive classification of drugs?
So I'm not familiar. Congress put that language in our reauthorization, and I'm actually not, I don't know the background of that.
Would you support legislation to allow you to participate and to voice your opinion and to use science as a basis for your determination?
Well, what I would do is support that federal agencies have the ability to do that. So
yours is prohibited by law. Should that restriction not be lifted?
Again, I think we'd have to have subsequent conversation in terms of.
You mean you think you should be muzzled?
I think that it's important that our office not involve itself in terms of given legislation or given activities. And I believe that that was the genesis for that language, that the office not involve itself in state.
But the totality of the drug world, you need to participate. And if you realize that medical marijuana, as 20 states have found, can help people with cancer, with nausea, with those maybe glaucoma. I mean, Montel Williams apparently has some benefits from it. Lots of people do. That you should be able to participate and set our drug policy straight. Your job should be to have a sane drug policy, not to be muzzled and handcuffed.
Yeah. From again, my standpoint, I'm happy to engage in fuller conversation, is that that has not handcuffed other offices and other federal agencies who are tasked with that work from investigating.
In 1971, Congress created a commission that was headed by Governor Schaefer of Pennsylvania to study federal marijuana policy. That commission came out in favor of decriminalization, but it wasn't put in place. That was 1971. Would you support a new commission to study federal marijuana policy?
So I haven't seen that legislation. I'd be happy to have further conversation.
Would you? It's a concept.
Again, I think we'd be happy to have a conversation in terms of what that might look like.
Thank you, sir. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Well.